My
Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Trumos Perek Yud Halacha Vav. We are learning the final full daf of the 10th chapter, Daf Tzadik Zayin, and we're starting on Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top of the Amid by the brackets Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer. So let's quickly go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah quoted Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri as saying that kaved, that liver, renders foods cooked with it prohibited. Because liver, unlike other parts of the animal, that after salting it is completely freed from halachic blood. And even though we know sometimes there is some red secretion that comes out of meat, I think the word was mechal, right, from smicha. It's not halachic blood. Liver is different. And by the way, what I'm saying now, part of what I'm saying now is really going to be debated in the Gemara. I'm just saying the way halacha l'maisa, that we, as I mentioned, we eat liver only after roasting it. Because we are of the opinion that salting liver, even though the salting process, all of the steps in the salting, the 3 steps, it extracts the blood. But by liver, it will not fully extract the blood. And what makes it worse is that some of the blood will be removed from the liver when you cook it, which is what Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is saying, that if you cook anything with liver, that thing will become asur because liver will continuously expel blood, secrete blood, and the other things will absorb it. But then he adds another very important point, that since the liver, dafke because of the fact that the liver is continuously secreting blood, it's not able, while it's secreting, to absorb. And therefore, in the other direction, if something not kosher was cooked with liver, and as we mentioned, even if non-kosher liver was cooked with kosher liver, it's amazing, together, not pickling, not partial cooking, the liver will remain kosher. I'll tell you even more, liver is constantly secreting blood, like we mentioned, if it only went through malicha. So then you would argue, well, if it's secreting blood, even if you cook liver with itself, it should be asur, because it secretes blood, and then some of that blood is going to be reabsorbed. That's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is saying, that liver, on one hand, is continuously secreting blood. On the other hand, because of that, it will not absorb. The liver itself will remain permitted. That was Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And we're going to have, I know in quantity of today's daf, very few lines, but the very significant, we're going to have a lot of discussion about kaved, about liver. Just to say in the words of intro, one important nakuda. I know I mentioned it in the last year. When it comes to the prohibition of having blood, really, not all bloods are prohibited on the same level. It's always asur. Blood, dam ha-nefesh, is isur kares, worse than chazir. Dam evarim is a lav, not to minimize, God forbid, a lav, but there's no kares. Dam evarim means if it's not the blood that leaves the animal when it's being shechted or killed, which means that the soul left the animal through that blood. That's dam ha-nefesh. Talking about stam, you shechted an animal, and then there's blood in the limbs. And it's important to note, and what I'm saying now is even true halacha l'maisa, that dam evarim shaloi peirash, the blood that are in their natural place in the body of the animal is mutter to be consumed. Halachically, it's permitted to consume raw meat only after rinsing it. And you're rinsing it because there might be some blood on top of the meat that's secreted from inside the meat. That blood is called dam shepeirash. It moved from its natural place. If you just rinse it, you can eat it. If you remember, we learned that they used to shecht an animal, and for medicinal purposes, they would cut out a piece of meat from the place of the shechita. That was the freshest, and that was a refuah. And you can eat it. Raw, sushi meat, whatever you call it. But dam evarim shepeirash is asir b'lav, which is why if you plan to cook meat prior to that, you have to salt it. What does salting do? Salting removes all the meat. The other option is to roast. Roasting, not only does roasting remove the blood. Thank you. Salting removes the blood. I'm sorry, stand corrected. But not only is roasting like salting, a koyach, that removes the blood, but roasting does something in addition, that whichever blood was not removed becomes sealed in its place. That's the way we understand roasting. Which is why after liver is roasted, we will be allowed to cook the roasted liver. Because we're not going to say that new blood will be secreted from the liver. Just remember these nakudas. Not everything that I said will be in the Gemara today. Actually, there will be other opinions that will disagree with it. I just shared what we do with Poyel Mamash. The second big topic of today, which will take up the most of the daf, it's a huge daf. Chaval that it's only a one day this. You have just very little on before the end of the Perek after this. Is the discussion regarding the egg. Now, the Mishnah was speaking about cooking an egg in water, an egg, even if the egg still has its klipa on, with the spices of truma. And the point the Mishnah made is that even though the shell of the egg is on the egg, since it's porous, it does not stop the contents in the egg to absorb your cooking, this tam of the spices of truma. So the egg becomes prohibited to a non-kohen. Obviously, there's a ratio involved, but if there is the tam of the spices, then the egg becomes prohibited. Okay, now from this, we're going to go on a whole journey. And just a few words that are important to prepare ourselves for this journey. First of all, you have a halacha, and I'm going to quote the words, Beitza shesholkon umatza bohen efroyach. That means that there's a possibility that a embryo developed in the egg, and it just didn't hatch.
Or an embryo.
Embryo, and you didn't know that, and you cooked it, and now that you cooked it, you opened up the egg, and you find a dead chick. If that egg is asun midoiraisa nevela. And when it comes to the topic of nois and tam, being that there was meat, a unhatched chick is made out of meat. It gives off flavor. So you have to have the ratio that's normally needed for nois and tam. Now, normally we say the ratio is 60 against 1. And as I mentioned already in the last year, that by an egg, in Shulchan Aruch, we say 61 to 1. The source will be part of what we'll discuss today. Turns out that we're going to have many ratios, 61 to 1, 47 to 1, 50 to 1. And all of that will come from one underlying logic, like I mentioned, that eggs don't have the same size. In addition, you have to have a total of 60 against 1. But you could include the klipa of the heter. Actually, the klipa, the shell of the chick that was unhatched, that shell is not problematic. The shell is not basar. That actually should be added to the tzad of the heter. Then you have the water. So you can use everything in the pot to be included in the 60 against the 1 of the unhatched chick. But I want to go into another detail, that there is a big nafkamina in halacha, whether the embryo was fully developed, eloma, it was unhatched, that is also midoiraisa, and then you have an embryo that is developing. It's not fully developed. Just to know, that is taka asr midrabana. And there's consequences, which we won't discuss today, just to be aware of that. Now, there's another topic of blood in the egg. And in our Gemara today, we will differentiate. If the blood is the beginning of the development of an embryo, like I mentioned, we're going to call this actually only Asr Midrabanan, just to know the real, the emes, because the Isser Doirais is only when it's fully developed and dead. But Asr Midrabanan. But if the blood in the egg came because there was some type of wound that happened to the hen or to the egg, or to the attachment of the egg in the hen when it was still attached to the ovary, if there was some type of wound, that zetz, that klap that the hen underwent could result in some blood developing in the egg, and that perhaps is even mutter. So we'll have to determine whether this is the beginning of an embryo or whether the blood is not even from there, it's from a wound. And according to our Gemara, if it's coming from a wound, not from an embryo, it's not even Asr Midrabana. Atkan, the words of introduction. These are huge topics. Just to finish one thing, that nowadays, because of most of our eggs that are being raised by hens, that are being raised to give off eggs, they purposefully keep the roosters away. All of that downgrades the problem to begin with. which is
non-fertilized.
Non-fertilized eggs. Okay, and in the Chazal here, we're talking about eggs that potentially could have been fertilized. And you should just know that a rooster, even in the vicinity, I forgot, 50 amma, 500 amma, one rooster, if there's any rooster in the vicinity, then halachically we say it could be all of the hens got fertilized from that rooster. Okay, let's go.
Rabbi, are we going to talk about Ben Pakua at all? To contrast
not today,
it with these?
Not interesting, not today. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer, that liver, he wasn't speaking about liver that was roasted. We're going to speak about liver. No matter what you did, whether you roasted it, whether you salted it or not, when you cook liver will continuously expel blood. Anything that was cooked with the liver will become asur, but the liver itself will remain mutter. And even if the liver was cooked with treifa meat, and even if the liver was cooked with treifa liver, nevela liver, because the kosher liver, because of the fact that it's continuously secreting, it's not going to absorb. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the following question, and we're going to quote two different ways of understanding his question. The words are, Shalaka b'chalav mahu. Based on Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, what were to happen if you cooked liver in milk? Now, one way of understanding the question is that maybe Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is not even qualifying liver as meat. By the fact that we are saying that liver will continuously secrete blood. Why? Maybe Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri halachically defines liver as a shtik blood. Now you can ask a question, if that would be the case, then what Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, you should never be allowed to eat liver. No, when the Torah prohibits eating blood, it did not prohibit liver. Liver can be eat. And what would happen if we're going to view liver as blood? The Torah says, Lo yisavashal gedi b'chalev imoi. And we understand that to mean not only gedi, not only b'chalev imoi, but basar from a min tohaira, challah from a min tohaira are not allowed to be cooked together. Forget about eating it later. You're not allowed to cook it together. If liver is not qualified as meat, if liver is qualified as blood, maybe you should be allowed to cook liver and milk. That's one way of understanding this question. Another way of understanding the question is, no, liver is for sure meat. But since he's saying that liver never absorbs anything when that's being cooked with the liver because it's constantly either the Torah lemiftat loibara, maybe when does the Torah prohibit cooking meat and milk? When or why? Because they are transmitting to each other. They're secreting. They are absorbing. Masha enkein. Something that will never absorb, which is the liver, maybe Hashem lechatchila allows you to cook liver with the milk. Now, that doesn't mean that you will be allowed to eat the milk. It's another reason. The milk for sure not. The meat, yeah.
That's what basically killed the discussion. But why are we referring to liver as cooking and not roasting? We're not allowed to eat a liver.
I said that nowadays we roast it to kasher it. Not only that, after we kasher it through roasting it, we today are allowed to cook liver after it was kashered through roasting. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that liver always expels blood. So either the shaila is whether it's considered dam and not basar, or Rabbi Yirmiyah's question is that maybe even though it's considered basar, maybe the isur of bishul basar b'chalav is only when they interchange with each other. And therefore it should be lachatchila muter to cook liver and milk. Again, the milk you won't be allowed to eat. We're not even talking about the Isser Achil. I'm talking about the Isser of Bishul. And whichever one he asked, the way the Marafulda understands that the V'lei Meshani Klum. All right. Now, for some reason, it being that he's over there with my machine, can you just close the door? And like this, he can enjoy it outside, and we're not going to get disturbed by it. Okay. Now, says the Gemara, Rab Ze'era, Lo yachal kaved miyamav. Rab Ze'era never ate liver. Why did Rab Ze'era never eat? Why did he never eat liver? Look inside the Rashirilya. There's many different ways of understanding it. It's around the middle of the right column. Probably 11 lines from the bottom, 12 lines from the bottom. That lo yachal kaved, so yakir, to what you're saying, he never ate kaved mevushul miyamav. In other words, he agreed with Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that no matter what you did with the liver, even if you roasted it, liver always has blood. And no, not that once you roasted it, it congeals the blood inside the Eivarim. No, the blood will, if you cook it, the blood will be Dam Sheperish. Then he was more Machmir than Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Since blood will be expelled, I don't accept the fact that none of it will be reabsorbed. It will be reabsorbed. So again, it's not that he never ate liver. He never ate cooked liver. Oh. Aber, now I know we had this a few days ago and we learned it differently, but here again, we're learning about one Amoira that had a Chumrah, that was once a guest on someone else's knew of Rab Ze'eda's Chumrah, and he did not respect it. So says the Gemara, Shalka Rabbi Ba v'oichlelei. Shalka means cooked. He went to Rabbi Ba. Rabbi Ba cooked liver, and he gave it to Rab Ze'eda. Look inside the Rashi Ilya, one line under that. Again, it's the middle of the right column. 10 lines from the bottom. Shalka Rabbi v'oichlelei. Shecholta beroischen. V'nis bashal dama betoicha. Be'inyan she'enoi peletes oid kishetes bashal im basar. So he's writing that prior to cooking it, I mentioned in the intro what we do today. Today we roast it. There was another technique that they did, which is that they would scorch it with boiling water. That's not the normal bishul. That's also a certain procedure where at that moment, some of the blood is extracted, but the ikad is that whatever was not extracted will never get extracted. And now v'hadam hamuvel b'toicha muter calls man shaloi yatsa, like we mentioned, because dam evarim shaloi perish is muter. So now we have an udin of cholta beraschen. Take boiling hot water and pour it on top of it. The point of the Gemara, the chiddush of the Gemara is, and not like we learned a few days ago that the other Amayra changed their mind, is Rabbi Ba was so. Yes, blood is staying in the same place, Michal, is fine. That's what we're saying. Not only by liver, by anything. Which is why halachically today you are allowed to eat raw meat even if it was not salted. As long as you make sure there's no blood sitting on top of the meat when you're eating it. You rinse it and you put it in your mouth and you eat it. Because the blood that normally would be an Isur Lav did not yet leave its location. Here he was against Rab Ze'eda's Chumrah. It's like sometimes you say Kol HaMachmir is a chassid shaita or other not the positive expressions. He went against him. He gave it to him. The Isamrin, other people say even better. He didn't do that. He sealed it with boiling hot water. That's even a bigger chiddush. In other words, Rabbi Ba does not paskin like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. But he holds that salting it is like any other meat. Who said liver is different? Only Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said liver is different. It's not different. You malicha takes out the blood. You see red mechal, right? That was the word in Shulchan Aruch. I forgot in Chulin. Mechal ba'alma. That's not halachic blood. The blood goes out for the salting.
It says it's fed to him. Does it mean it's forced him to eat it? Why would it say fed to him?
That means either I'm going to give everyone an interpretation. He told Rab Ze'eda what it is. He didn't lie to him, but he insisted that he eats it. And he convinced him that his halachic ruling was wrong. That's the best way for me to understand it. And not that he gave it to him and he told him, aha, I got you. He didn't do that. What was that? No, because we paskin that salting, which extracts all of the blood, does so, with the exception of liver, I think, and of brain. I think there's another. We say that there's so much blood in it that it doesn't extract all the blood. We say even roasting doesn't extract all the blood. Elama, it seals the remaining in the place, which is what the roischen does. Okay, now we're moving on to the Iker bold topic of today, which is the Mishnah spoke about how in the direction of the egg, an egg can never be truma, but you cooked an egg in a pot today, but you put seasonings that were truma or prohibited seasonings, hegdish, which you should not have done, or kili akerem or arla, and one would think that since the egg was unshelled, that means it was still in its klipa. You might have thought that the klipa creates a barrier. It doesn't do that. We're going to actually learn today that it does it in some areas. We're going to get that soon. Not in the case of the Mishnah, and certainly not in the case of the unhatched egg. Okay, so now begins the Gemara, and what part of the egg is prohibited? The Mishnah says, even the chel moin. Just to know, guys, there's chel moin, which is the yolk, and there's chel boin, which is the white. Even, in other words, not only does the klipa not prevent the egg from absorbing, but it absorbs it all the way down to the core. Every part of the egg now was awesome. Says the Gemara, we learned in the Braisa, taught by Bar Kapara. They get the same words of the Mishnah, that chel moin aser, but the Braisa always elaborates more. The kol shchein, and certainly what we would call the chel boin, and now you know chel boin is really an abbreviated form. It's a composite of the words chalev beitzim. Chalev beitzim, which means the milk of an egg. The milk is white. It's just a lashon in Chazal that for sure, because if the taste is going to go into the yellow, that means it went through the white and it stayed in the white. I don't know why Yakid is so impressed. Chalev beitzim, to know how it works. So chel boin. Okay, just to know, mem and nun, they are interchangeables at the end of the letter. Now let's start. Yitzchak Rabbi, great Yitzchak, the name of Rav Shimon Lakish, gives the following rule: Beitzim sheshalakon umatzo behem efroyach. Here I'm speaking about a fully developed efroyach. This is on the side, but again, just not to forget that there is Isur D'Oraisa, Isur D'Rabbanan, and there are many halachic consequences, even though they're both prohibited. But let's speak about a fully developed, unhatched chick, and you didn't know that it's fully developed. Maybe it should have weighed more. You didn't weigh it. You put everything in the water, and now that you are unpeeling, you see there's mamish, an embryo. Now this is mamish nevela, and it's called basar nevela. And what I'm saying now is very important. Just like spices have a koyach to go through the klipa, so does meat. And let me just tell you right now, you know what does not have the power to go through a double klipa? If you cook together eggs from a kosher bird together with eggs from a non-kosher bird, we're going to have this in the Gemara soon. If they were both in their shell, we say that even though, you cook them together, if they were both shelled, then the kosher eggs remain kosher. In our Mishnah, we are clearly saying otherwise, because our Mishnah spoke about spices. The spices themselves are not in a shell. We're speaking about Yitzchak Rabba b'shem Reish Lakish. Meat has a much greater tam. So the tam of an efroyach goes through its own klipa, goes into the water, goes into everything else, goes through other eggs, as long as it's benois and tam. Benois and tam means that if you had one efroyach, unhatched chick, and you had 1,000 eggs cooked together, the ratios will nullify it. Now again, normally nois and tam demands 60 against 1. So says the Gemara, now we're starting, that Rab Ze'eda machloikes. Rab Ze'eda, in the name of Rab Shimon bar Abba, in the name of Rab Yochanan, and also Rab Ze'eda, in the name of Rab Ada bar Gershon, in the name of Rab Kirai, in the name of Rab Levi Bal Palta, in the name of Zaken Echad. Sometimes Zaken goes to Eliyahu Navi, but here, B'Shem Rebbe, I know there are many Amirayim, and they all are on this side, but we're going to quote this, the Shita of Rebbe. Don't worry, we're going to have another Rebbe that will appear to contradict this, but it won't. So one side says, and this is, by the way, this is what we paskin in Shulchan Aruch, that even though when you say nois and tam, as we mentioned, that it began with the words nois and tam, sometimes in the middle of the era of the Amirayim, they determined it's 60-1. Here, it doesn't work that way. That even if you have a total of 61, 60 normal eggs, one unhatched chick, that's called 60-1, right? There's 60 good against 1 bad. Even there, it's still going to be awesome. You know, when you resolve the nois and tam, only if you have a total of 62, which is the ratio of 61-1. Shishim ushtayim, only then is it mutaris. In the Rishonim, there are 2 main reasons. One, we're not going to learn. I think the Ramban, we learned this in Chulin. The eggs are chashuv. So you need 1 more. We're not going with that. Clearly, we're not going with that. Everything that we'll learn will only make sense with that which the Rashba says in Chulin. He probably quotes this over here. It has to do with the fact that it has to be 60-1. Eggs could look to you that they're of the same size, but one can be a little bit bigger, one can be a little bit smaller. The only way to be vadai known, for you to know certainly that there was the ratio of 60-1, maybe the unhatched chick was a little bit bigger, and the other ones were a little bit smaller. Now, if there would be a huge disparity in size, you'll notice that, but sometimes you won't notice it. That's why he said 62, and that will answer everything we're going to learn from now. But it's interesting that by eggs, we say not 60 to 1, 61 to 1, or a total of 62. But all of that is one side, Shitas Rebbe and all the others. However, there's another side. Rab Shmuel bar Nachman, b'shem Rabbi Yonasan, Heyid Ada, Chavereinu Lefanenu, this is going to be the Shita of Rabbi Ada. No, B'shishim. In other words, when is it Asur? Only if you have a total of 60. What does it mean, a total of 60? 59 to 1, right? 59 good, 1 bad. That's when it's a problem. In other words, the moment you have a total of 61, when you have the normal, you don't need to go beyond the normal. 60 to 1. V'amar,
Right.
let me just finish it 1 second, Kevin.
Sorry.
Let me do it. V'amar mi sheyaveli yoser mishishim. If someone cooked together more than a total of 60, that means they cooked together 61, machsherano, I will use the normal ratio. Yes, Kevin.
The 60 to 1, it's not a volume or a weight, it's just a number.
That's right.
Correct?
And we
So
want
why
it to be a volume, or we want it to be a weight, and whichever one, since eggs are packaged by God, just because you have the number 60 doesn't mean you have either the volume or the weight. It could actually be that the side of Isur is a little bit bigger.
Got it.
That's the logic behind Rebbe. Says the Gemara, Amrin l'Shimon Barva. And this is Benegeh, the first opinion, that Amar at Hachin, do you indeed say this, that what? That you need to have 62 total. Do you say that? But Ve'inun Amrin Hachin. But you see that the others, we had all these others, Rab Shmuel bar Nachman, in the name of Rabbi Yonasan, in the name of Rabbi Ada, that no, like when you hear, when you become so accustomed to Bittul B'Shishim, you push back. Why would you say that? Amaloin, so he told him, Ano ma deshamis, Ve'inun ma deshamun. No, he did not give in. He says, I know I'm not debating that which you heard. Yes, you heard correct. Rav Ada holds that you have the normal ratio. But I stand that I heard again that Rab Ze'edah, Rab Shimon bar Abba, and Rab Yochanan, and Rab Ze'edah, there's a lot of Amirayim. No, I heard that you have to have a machlokes. You have to have more. You have to have more number. Then the Gemara says, Vaita, Shimon Barva, Amar Komi Rab Chanina, Maisa Ba Lefnei Rabban Gamliel, who is the son of Rebbe. Guys, don't forget, Rebbe was the Tzad HaMachmer. Sounded like it. And you know what he told him? Amalei Rab Gamliel said, listen to these words. So we learned that Rebbe was more machmer. You have to have 61 good eggs. And he says, Abba loy moire, did my father not once paskin that even though there was only 47 good, forget about 61 good, 47 good. I remember, he's saying he's a son, that there was a case where there was 47 good eggs against one unhatched chick, and he said that all of the eggs are kosher, which is a proof. Now we're learning the pshat in the whole Gemara, which is a proof that it's not about the number of eggs, okay, and it's either about the total volume or about the total weight. And let's add another part into the equation. What do you get to add to the shear of 60? Not only the eggs, you get to add the shells of the kosher eggs. You actually get to add the shell of the chick. You get to add the water. And if there were vegetables, you get to add the vegetables. You know, you need to have a total of 60 heter. And in that, there was one of Isur. It's not strong enough to be nice and tam, and everything, the tam becomes watered down. So just like I witnessed my father in another case, where even though there were actually only 47 eggs, he paskin it's good. Rabbi Gamliel says, and I know why he did it, because he was looking for the volume, let's say, of 60. When he looked at the case that came in front of him, the kosher eggs were even bigger than the eggs of the story of his father. And because they were bigger, he says, in my case, I'm going to paskin that even though there's only 45 eggs, it's still going to be kosher. Yes, Yakir. Can't hold himself in.
So then I'm just curious, what's the required weight and volume in actuality?
60 to 1. Only 60 total of kosher against the one of the unhatched chick. And the Rav should not be foolish, should not be a black and white person. He should take a look at every case and he should see what's in the pot. Look at the size of the eggs. Look how much water there is. Look if they put other things in the pot. Maybe the unhatched chick was very little. Look at that. Don't be a shoiter. 60 to 1. Count the eggs. That's the problem in this whole world. People push it. They don't go one. They don't make an effort to go deeper. My father said 61 is needed, and I remember my father said 47. So think. And based on the understanding, in 45 is good. And others said, Rab Chia b'shem Rab Chanina, Maisebal l'fnei Rebbe, and v'amar, you know what? Another story. There, Rebbe looked at that pot, and he says that if you have 50 eggs, then you're good. The Gemara wants to point out that Rebbe is not all over the place. B'diyuk. And the other side, now you see the danger when people quote, the Rav said, in that case, so and so. You might be missing the whole point. Mamish. Rebbe at Paskin 50. Now you see, Rebbe Paskin 50, Rebbe Paskin 62, Rebbe Paskin 47, you have 45, all these different numbers.
Why don't they just say you can't pass it from just a story because you don't know the particulars of that story.
That's right. Even if you knew. In other words, who were to know? You have to be careful. You have to be careful with everything. To be Madama Milsala Milsa, most people get it wrong most of the times. It's scary. Rab Chia b'shem Rab Chanina. I know Akeva wanted to say something. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to say, why don't they say the 60 to 1 is only egg versus egg, not the volume of everything else added? That's the difference, right? If there's other stuff.
The Gemara is going to say it now. In other words, the later on we got, the more we have to be clear. The Gemara is saying that how does that work? Because you should know that the vegetables that are in the pot and the klipa of the kosher egg and the water, they all combine to the number 60. Not only that, Amarab Ze'era, I'll tell you more than that. That on the side of heter, not only do you include the kosher egg, you include the shell. On the side of the non-kosher egg, you do not include the shell. Amarab Ze'era ve'isur, on the egg that's usur, what are you measuring? Only the content, not the klipa. And then Rav Huna says, and I'll tell you better, and the klipa of the treif, the klipa of the non-kosher, is added to the side of the heter. Mystically, this is a very powerful statement. The klipa of an isur is added to the tzad of heter. I know that in Chassidus, the word klipa is like the worst thing is not the klipa. The worst thing is the toichen. If it's only klipa problem, the klipa itself will not be a problem. Amar Afuna, klipe yisur malinis aheter. And for those of us who learned Tanya yesterday, Mistama today again, that the who is able to go into Gan Eden, that's what they announced. Only the people that transform bitterness to sweetness, darkness to light. Not the people that live in light, make more light. Making more light will get you nowhere, and the world will become dangerous. You have to turn the darkness into light. That's the only way forward. The klipa of Isur will elevate the heter. Very important that whatever you're suffering with, that's the nakuda. And the more you avoid it, the farther away you get from Gan Eden. Not that we're rushing there. We're speaking about Gan Eden in this world. Not Miami, L.A., L'chaim. Okay, Tanya. Now here we go. We learned in a Braisa. Now this will appear to contradict everything we learned. We learned in the Mishnah that Truma goes through the shells. We learned clearly, Mishem Reish Lakish, that was how we began with that Beitz in Sheshulakun, Umatzu Behem Efroyach, Benois and Tam. And we said if it's an Afroyach that's developed, fully developed, it's Asur Doiraisa. Even though the Afroyach was in a shell and the other eggs are in a shell, now we're saying that the shells are. If you don't have the ratio, it goes through it. Here it says in a Braisa that if you have Beitzim from a bird species that are Tohoides, generally, we know it if both ends are not symmetrical. That's one of the three simanim, right? If they're both chad or both meshupa, if they're symmetrical, the eggs, it's from a non-kosher species. So, beitzim tohoidish shlak and matameyos, Bryce says, you know what? You are allowed to eat it. You don't have to have a nois and tam. You know why? Because the tam of spices goes through shells. The taste of meat, unhatched chick is basar, goes through its shell and the other shell. Beitzim, which are tameyos, non-kosher, if they are in the shell and the other is in a shell, the two shells will prevent for there to be an absorption in the tahoiros from the tameos. That's what Rab Zayda is saying. Hadol the Tamed, when does the Braisa say that if you cook them together, you don't need to have a nice and tam ratio? I don't care. You could have had many tameos with one tahoiros. The tahoiros remains good. That's only if both of them were shalak on Bikaplayim. Or even, now goes a chiddush, even if they were cooked after they were peeled, you can ask, how is that possible? You cooked them once and you cooked them again. Cooked them once and you cooked them again. Shalukais b'shalukais. If they were both cooked previously, we learned this 2 days ago. When you put something in water, there's a certain amount of secretion. There's a certain amount of absorption. If the eggs were already cooked prior to you cooking the kosher and the non-kosher together, there won't be enough absorption to render it problematic. There'll be a little bit of absorption, but it's going to be what we would call a minimal or halachically insignificant amount, and it won't be nice and tam. Amazing. Wow. If they were previously cooked. Daf tzadik zayin amud beis. Avol, however, now let's go the different ways. Shalakon, shalak, shalakan, lashon abim. That avol, shalakan, beitzim kulufais. B'she'enim kulufais, even according to the Braisa. Even though it's not meat, it's just eggs. But if you cooked, now, the non-kosher eggs, let me just read, the non-kosher eggs had no klipa. And they were cooked with the kosher eggs that were in their shell, or in the other direction. In other words, you don't have two shells. Only one of them had a shell. Or one of them were cooked before, one of them was not cooked before. It's not that they were both cooked before. Then sirichin shir acher. And the shir acher is what we learned, my friends. Theoretically, 60-1. Practically, not 60-1. Look inside the pot and see the sizes and make the cheshbon that we did before. Okay, another braisa. Braisa. Words, gi'ule beitzim mutarim. The words ge'ule means that eggs were aborted, and we're not speaking about an egg. Why would an egg get aborted? I know there's a system. I think it's a 21-day process, right? Like almonds. We learned about that in the eggs. But when the egg is still connected to the ovaries, let's say someone hit the hen fell, an animal jumped on the hen. Something happened to the hen that disconnected the egg from the ovary. I want you to know that egg has the status of Ever Menachai. We're not talking about that. He's talking about another type of abortion, that the natural process of the egg already disconnecting itself from the ovaries happened. Normally, it has to stay in the animal of the hen, has to stay in the body of the hen for however amount of days for it to develop. It has to gestate. If something happened to it and it was prematurely expelled, even though through a makkah, the word of the Braisa is, it doesn't have the status of Ever Menachai. That's what we're talking about. And therefore you can eat it. Now, if there'll be blood in it, like I mentioned, even in a undeveloped chick, it's certainly going to be asur midrabanan. We'll get to the blood in a moment. We're not speaking about blood. We want to know, first of all, whether it's asur mitzad Ever Menachai. So he makes a statement, gi'ule beitzim mutarim. Now, the word gi'ule is an uncommon word for something that's being expelled, and here it means prematurely expelled, aborted. So the Gemara interrupts the Braisa, and the Gemara is going to quote a pasuk in Iyuv, in where we find the word yagil to mean the same thing. That's the Gemara. When it says, Iyuv, when he was in the mode of complaining, he was pointing out how wicked men succeed, how righteous men fail, and one of the examples that he gave is that if you have a wicked man bull, shoyd iber v'lo yagil, that when the bull of the wicked men impregnates their own cows, there's no abortions. Everything works wonderful. And by the just, if you're a tzaddik, you're going to suffer. That was his tainus. But he used the words yagil as a word for that by the wicked, they impregnate the lo yagil. What is yes yagil? To lose the animal. Back into the Brais. Now, beitzim shehir kimu, the eggs that already have begun to develop embryos. It's important. So here we're not talking about Ever Menachai. Here we got a problem. The egg began to develop. So now the Braisa says, Harayelu asurois. And I want you to know, interestingly, if it's fully developed, nevela midoiraisa. Not fully developed, nevela midrabanan. Just to know halacha lemaisa. There's many nafkaminas whether something is asur daraisa darabanan. Another din, if you have eggs that are called muzaros, in English it's called adult. Now, which means when an egg stands for a long time, they spoil. And when they spoil, their contents turn stringy. Muzaros means yarn. Stringy means is that you can extend the contents like yarn. Now, it did not begin to develop, but it spoiled. Is it kosher or not? So now there's another issue. Just to know, there's something called balta shaksu. Not everything kosher is allowed to be eaten. If something makes you feel disgusted, if something makes you feel revolted, there is an isur dairaisa to do it or to eat it. So the Braisa says, if the problem is muzarois, then it's person by person. Hanefesh hayafa. Hanefesh hayafa means someone, we call that a pretty nefesh, someone who is not finicky. That's yafa, non-finicky, toichal, which implies that if you feel revolted, many people, when they think about muzarais here, they already made a face. That's someone who has a nefesh that's not yafa, and they're not allowed to eat it. Balta shaksu. Now the final matzah behem dam, says the Brais, if you find blood, all you need to do is koilef makem adam. All you need to do is to remove the blood. Perhaps it also means that you have to remove the egg content immediately around the blood only, and the rest you can eat. And by the way, nowadays, that's the way we paskin, because nowadays they're not fertilized. You don't have to remove the whole egg. You only have to remove the blood, and you have to make sure you get all of it by removing all of the egg that's immediately adjacent to the blood. And that's what the Braisa is saying. Koilef makem hadam. Now, what the Braisa is not saying that this is only if the eggs were not fertilized. The Braisa is saying that in the times of the Braisa, even if the egg was fertilized, if it began to develop an embryo, then it's asur midrabanan. If it's fully developed, it's asur d'oraisa. If all you have is blood, don't have that blood. But everything else you can have, take out the blood. Now, says the Gemara, Rabbi Ze'eda, Salik mevakra l'Rabbi Chia b'rei Rabbi Yitzchak atu shaya. He just came up. He went up to visit this great Rabbi Chia, whether he bikar chaylim, whether just to visit him, and Ashkech Yosef, and he found Rabbi Yitzchak was sitting and saying that this B'raisa that tells you that you have to discard the blood, well, not so simple. Leishanu ella. Now this is so important. Chelmoin, only if the blood was found on the chelmoin, on the yolk, aval chelboin. But if the blood was found on the chelboin, on the chalav beitzim, on the white, then we say that it's mutter. Why? This is important. Only meat blood. These are the words of Chazal. Only meat blood is problematic. Even if the problem is only midrabanan, it's only problematic if it's meat blood. Other bloods, which means one of the reasons for which there might be blood inside an egg is because the hen got wounded. And we're going to call that injury blood. Injury blood is not prohibited at all. So the ovary got injured. Because of that injury, some blood went into the egg. This Rabbi Yitzchak Atushaya is saying that is not a problem. Now, how would we know where it came from? So he's saying depends where you find it. If you find it on the yolk, that means it's beginning to develop into an embryo. We're going to view it as dam basar asur midrabanan. If we find it on the white, we halachically can presume that it came from a wound, and that dam is b'chlal not a problem. This is what Rab Ze'eda heard from him. So the Gemara says that hu savar hu gabe min avase. When Rab Ze'eda heard that, he thought that Rabbi Yitzchak is repeating something that he heard from min avahase. Do you know what davening means? Just to know. Why do we say that? Why do we call prayers davening? What word is da'avuhain? Davening means that which our forefathers did. And that which our forefathers did, that's called our tradition that has a lot of koyach. So he thought that this statement of Rabbi Yitzchak is something that he got b'mesoides. So it's more important. However, but then he heard another statement. Now that other statement it made Rabbi Ze'eda understand that Rabbi Yitzchak was saying his own Torah. and therefore it's less significant. It could be argued with. Now, interestingly, Rabbi Yochanan was not more lenient. Rabbi Yochanan was more machmer. Rabbi Yochanan says no, that if you find blood, bein chelboin, bein chelmoin, you have to assume that it began to develop, the embryo began to develop. Blood that's coming because of an embryo development is going to be asur midrabanan. And now we're going to add a nuance to that. Tani Rav Chalafta ben Shol. Let's finish this amar over here. That you should know here. Chel moin asur, chel boin asur. Mitamol. Now we're backing up Rabbi Yitzchak. No, only on the yoke. Amar Rab Ze'eda. Oh, the amar. That which you say. Let me clarify. Bechel boin asur. Let me tell you the way Rab Ze'eda understood them. He's after Rab Ze'eda knew that it's not a Messias. Actually, Rabbi Yochanan was more machmer. He agreed to the logic of Rabbi Yitzchak. But he came with another understanding. Let me just say the following. Like, this is something you have to know the mitzias. When the sperm attaches itself to the egg, the way it works, the sperm first attaches itself to the white. And then it works its way into the yellow. And what Rab Ze'eda understands in the Braisa, really understanding what Rabbi Yochanan is saying, it's not black and white. White okay, yellow not okay. Both white, both yellow not okay. No. If you can actually find traces of sperm by the blood, that's a siman that it's coming from the development of the embryo. Then, and interestingly, the sperm attaches itself to the white. Then it moves into the yellow. So whether you find it on the white or whether you find it on the yellow, if there is sperm on top of the blood, you can see it. That's when we have to halachically say it began to develop into an embryo. Dam is called dam basar, asur midrabanan. If you find the blood away from where the sperm is, both on the white and on the yellow, then you can assume that it came from a wound, and you don't even have to remove the blood. I'm going to read this inside. Hada amar bechel moin asur. When is it to a problem on the yoke? Only kishenimsa b'makim zachruse shel chelmoin. That's the way we're going to touch. B'makim zachruse shel chelmoin means that there is some sperm. You can see some remains of the sperm. Since it's in the place of the sperm, we can say the sperm was attached there. It began to develop. And since the problem of finding it on the yoke is only if you find the zachrusai, then even if you find it on the white, ba'afilu chel boin, again, v'hu shenimtza b'makim zachrusai shemimenu efroyach noitzar. But if you find the blood not where the sperm is, then both on the white and on the yellow, actually you can be lenient. And to be continued.